Hi, folks. Welcome back. I'm Dennis Vetosa, also known as Chef Noodles, and today we're going to be talking about the Odyssey, not the one by Homer, but the one by Christopher Nolan. Arguably, this is already being treated as one of the worst movies ever made, despite the fact that it hasn't even been released yet. If you were to listen to the internet, though, you'd think that this movie is an absolute disaster. A lot of people are rushing to that conclusion, primarily because of the casting choices and some of the art direction. It seems as though Christopher Nolan decided to make the classic woke Hollywood move of tossing history, reason, plot, common sense, and everything people love about Western civilization out the window in order to appeal to the worst impulses of Marxist grievance politics. Needless to say, the movie is getting absolutely ratioed online. It's receiving loads of criticisms, bad reviews over the casting for several different reasons, and we're going to cover most of them today. The movie is also being heavily memed, and from what I've seen so far, it doesn't seem to be appealing to its target audience. I honestly don't know who this movie is supposed to be for, other than people who enjoy epic adventures, which traditionally has been predominantly a male audience. Anyway, let's watch a short clip from the movie, and I do mean a short clip because I can't show the whole thing because we'll get hit with some copyright claims, but this should give us enough context to understand exactly what people are criticizing and why this movie has been generating as much backlash as it has. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Short and sweet, but like I said, I could only show a short clip because, funny enough, those literal 1.5 seconds worth of footage are the reason so many people are upset with this movie. The casting choices have truly become a nail in the side of this production, which, by the way, according to several publications, including Discussing Film on X, Christopher Nolan has said this is some of Tom Holland's best work that most people will probably never see. Anyway, Tom Holland is, of course, one of the stars of the film alongside Matt Damon and several other recognizable characters. The cast also includes Elliot Page, a transgender actor who identifies as a man, portraying the Greek warrior Sinan in Nolan's The Odyssey. We caught a brief glimpse of Elliot, formerly known as Ellen Page, in the footage a moment ago. And that casting decision has been one of the movie's central sources of controversy from the beginning. Early on, many people speculated that Elliot had been cast as Achilles, which sparked a flood of memes across social media. People were asking how a woman, a biological woman, could portray the strongest warrior in the Greek army, and the internet did what the internet does. It turned the entire situation into meme material. There were just simply too many to count. Here is one of them. To say, there are probably hundreds of versions of this meme floating around the internet. Most of them take scenes featuring biologically male heroes engaging in some heroic moments and replace them with Elliot Page, who then comedically ends up dying almost instantly. Obviously, the joke is based on the idea that a biological woman can't be as strong, agile, or capable of going face to face with a powerful male warrior. The implication is that she would almost immediately lose the fight. Historically, that's one of the reasons men traditionally went to war, but that's an entirely different discussion for another day. Anyway, this wasn't the only casting decision that people questioned. Himesh Patel, who is Indian, was cast to play the Greek Eurylochus, and a lot of folks took issue with that as well. One person wrote, "Talk about horrible casting, but the worst is the ugly black woman as Helen of Troy." And yes, Lupita Nyong'o, who was cast as Helen of Troy, has received a tremendous amount of criticism for being cast in this role. The reason is fairly straightforward. See, traditionally, Helen of Troy represents one of the most iconic figures in Greek mythology, the woman known as the face that launched 1,000 ships. According to the myth, Helen is a daughter of the Greek god Zeus and the mortal Queen Leda. Her legendary, unparalleled beauty became the catalyst for the Trojan War after she was either abducted or eloped, depending on the version of this story, with the Trojan Prince Paris. Her extraordinary beauty isn't just a minor character trait, it's the entire foundation of the mythology. For further context, the story begins with a single golden apple. At a divine wedding, Eris, the goddess of strife, tossed the apple among the guests with the words, to the fairest engraved upon it. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite all claimed it. Paris, a young Trojan prince, was chosen to decide who deserved the price. Aphrodite leaned in and offered him the one bribe he couldn't refuse, the most beautiful woman alive, Helen. Paris sailed to Sparta, took Helen from King Menelaus, and shattered every sacred law of hospitality and marriage. But years later, Helen's father had required every one of her suitors to swear a sacred oath that whoever won her hand would be defended by all the others if anyone ever tried to take her away. So when Helen disappeared into Troy, that oath became an army. And here's the deeper point the ancient poets understood. Helen wasn't simply a beautiful woman. She was beauty in the flesh, the living embodiment of desire itself. Some traditions even describe her as an earthly manifestation of Eros. One glance from Helen could overwhelm reason, loyalty, and entire kingdoms. That's why 10,000 ships sailed, not merely for a queen, but for the face that launched them all. That's precisely why so many people have been posting comments like this one saying Christopher Nolan wants you to believe this is the face the Greeks and Trojans went to war over. It's also led to countless comparisons with the 2004 film Troy, starring Brad Pitt as Achilles, where people on X are memeing. They're putting the 2004 version of Helen of Troy side by side with Nolan's 2026 version in the Odyssey. And when you put those two versions next to each other, you start understanding why the backlash has been so noticeable. In fact, there's even data to back this up because early reports claimed the trailer had gained around 38,000 likes and roughly 123,000 dislikes. Later estimates suggested that number had climbed to nearly 250,000 dislikes. Now, obviously, we have to take these numbers with a grain of salt because YouTube doesn't publicly display dislike counts anymore. The only way people estimate them is through browser extensions, and those extensions aren't perfectly accurate. But judging from the reaction online and the overwhelming sentiment surrounding the trailer, it's reasonable to conclude that the video has received a substantial number of dislikes. In fact, Golden Series reported the latest trailer for Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey has more dislikes than likes on YouTube. Many viewers have criticized the film's seemingly modern dialogue and casting choices that lack historical accuracy. Now, what's ironic about all of this is that one of Hollywood's dominant narratives over the last several decades has been that older films were supposedly too Eurocentric and historically exclusionary. That criticism has largely fueled what many people describe as modern Hollywood's race to the bottom, embracing of DEI casting, where historical authenticity increasingly takes a back seat to identity-based casting decisions. Because of that, many people have speculated that Christopher Nolan made some of these casting choices because he wants to maximize his chances of winning another Oscar. For anyone unfamiliar, the Academy now has representation and inclusion standards that films must satisfy in order to qualify for the Best Picture category. Those standards encourage productions to meet certain diversity benchmarks across casting, crew, and other areas. As a result, many people have speculated that these casting decisions were influenced by those standards. Whether that's true or not, we simply don't know. Christopher Nolan hasn't publicly explained why he made these choices yet. All we know is that these are the choices he ultimately made. But needless to say, the memes didn't stop with Elliot Page, because there are countless memes featuring Lupita Nyong'o, and boy, are they brutal.
I didn't do nothing. Shoplifting ain't against the law. I asked to buy Kool-Aid with food stamps, and y'all said you don't do that no more, but I gotta get my nails done.
Well, that felt like a scene straight out of a World Star hip-hop compilation, and I'm not even kidding. It honestly could fit right into that entire website. Not that I'm surprised, though. This is what one would expect, especially when you're making these sorts of casting choices. And that, by the way, wasn't the only one. There are so many more.
He didn't even do nothing. Get your hands off me. Let me ask you a question. I know my rights. I don't gotta show you my license. Why is y'all arresting Tyrone for?
Will you just shut up?
That is definitely Oscar-worthy content if I've ever seen it. Anyway, a lot of people are also pointing to what they see as the irony surrounding Christopher Nolan. When he was first interviewed about the Odyssey, he said he wanted to do the story justice. Critics are now contrasting that statement with his casting decisions, particularly casting a transgender actor to play a Greek hero and casting Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy, which many people argue is not an appropriate fit for the role. This has also sparked a much broader discussion about how Hollywood standards have changed over the last several years. One meme that's been making the rounds compares a character played by Anne Hathaway in the 2000s, who was supposed to be portrayed as unattractive, with Lupita Nyong'o being cast as the most beautiful woman in the world in a 2026 adaptation of the Odyssey. There have also been plenty of hot takes online. One came from the Roman helmet guy who wrote, Nolan's Odyssey is a blaxploitation film. Nolan intentionally cast a black actress as the Greek Helen of Troy because he knew his race swapping would make Lupita Nyong'o hated, which would generate buzz and drive ticket sales. This is how modern Hollywood exploits black bodies. Now, I have to assume there's at least some satirical element to that commentary. He's taking traditionally progressive talking points and inverting them to mock the casting choice while simultaneously making the same underlying criticism. It's satire, but it's clearly intended to highlight what he sees as a contradiction. Obviously, this isn't literally a blaxploitation film. It's a period piece, but his broader point is that Lupita Nyong'o was intentionally cast in a role that he believes would predictably generate controversy. Whether Hollywood intended for her to receive personal abuse isn't a note, of course, but I do think they understood this casting decision would become one of the movie's biggest talking points. These studios conduct extensive focus groups. They've made similar race-swapped casting decisions before, such as The Little Mermaid, and they saw the reaction that that specific movie generated. I don't think they were really surprised by any of this. I think they anticipated this would happen, and I think they understand that controversy itself generates publicity. At the same time, it gives the studio another opportunity to publicly defend one of its actors against online criticism, creating another cycle of headlines and allowing Hollywood to present itself as standing up for an actor receiving backlash, a minority receiving backlash. The reality, however, is that not everyone criticizing this casting choice is motivated by racial animus, nor does disagreeing with a casting decision automatically imply that motivation. More broadly, if Hollywood is going to emphasize historical authenticity in some situations, people naturally question why that standard appears to be applied inconsistently when it comes to casting decisions like this one. For example, today it would be virtually unthinkable for a studio to cast someone who looks like Erling Haaland as an Egyptian during Cleopatra's reign, or to cast someone like Sydney Sweeney as Cleopatra. Whatever people think of those examples, they illustrate why many viewers perceive a double standard when it comes to historical casting decisions. Anyway, when you think of it analytically, this approach benefits the studio in two ways. First, it presents the casting as breaking barriers by placing a black actress in the role of Helen of Troy. Second, the controversy inevitably follows. The studio then can publicly defend the decision and the minority actor involved, reinforcing its public image as a good studio. That's why I personally think that the final line of the Roman helmet guy's post feels so symbolic, because he says, this is how modern Hollywood exploits black bodies. See, Hollywood loves to portray itself as the industry's foremost defender of minority communities, yet these highly controversial casting decisions can place individual minority actors directly at the center of intense public backlash online. You could even argue that in making these decisions, the studio is placing those actors on the front lines of a cultural war debate that was entirely predictable. Now, more broadly, a lot of Hollywood's messaging has been built around an oppressor versus oppressed framework, traditional Marxist dialectics. Now, one thing that I personally find interesting when we talk about these sorts of stories is to think about how, as demographics continue to change over the coming decades, whether these narratives will change as well or whether they'll remain fundamentally the same. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Either way, the savior dynamic reflected in the last line of Roman Helmet Guy's post ends up undermining itself, because in making a controversial casting decision that everyone knew would dominate the conversation, the studio effectively turned Lupita Nyong'o into the central figure of this controversy. Now, when you really think about it, almost nobody is talking about the plot, the cinematography, the art direction, or even Matt Damon's performance. Christopher Nolan, as we mentioned earlier, did praise Tom Holland's performance, but that became little more than a footnote compared to the discussion surrounding the casting. First, it was Elliot Page, and now it's Lupita Nyong'o. Those two casting decisions have overwhelmingly dominated the public conversation. Regardless of whether someone supports or opposes those choices, the actors themselves inevitably became the faces of the controversy. Now, I genuinely hope Nyong'o was compensated handsomely, because she's going to receive an enormous amount of criticism online, as we've been seeing. Personally, I don't think that criticism should be directed at her. If people disagree with the casting, their disagreement should be aimed at the studio, the casting directors, and Christopher Nolan, the people who made the decision to cast her, not an actor who accepted a role just to collect a paycheck. And look, to be completely honest, you couldn't pay me enough to willingly become the center of a controversy like this. And that's really the point. Everyone in Hollywood understands by now that making one of these controversial casting decisions will generate enormous discussion online. Whether that's a deliberate marketing ploy or simply an accepted consequence, it undeniably dominates the conversation. That said, I also don't think most moviegoers care nearly as much as social media does. Many people won't even notice, to be honest. In the trailer, these moments last only a split second. Most audiences are going to decide whether they see this movie based on whether it's actually entertaining. Yes, this controversy will probably discourage some people from buying tickets, but I guess it's closer to a 50-50 split. If we were to kind of guesstimate this, half the audience either won't know about the controversy or simply won't care. And if the movie ultimately turns out to be excellent, I suspect a significant number of people who are upset today will still end up watching it anyway. As I said when discussing Supergirl, quality ultimately matters when it comes to movies. If the movie is genuinely great, a lot of people will overlook aspects they dislike, because at the end of the day, audiences primarily care whether it's a good movie or not. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.